We are back to talk about the history of bioethics. Bioethics, like anything, is not born in a void. There's a path that the founder of bioethics, the person who is known as the founder of bioethics, Resner Bart Potter, follows to arrive at writing about bioethics and thinking of a specific discipline called bioethics that should take care of a sustainable well-being for human beings and their environment. So I would say that the two main characters that inspires Potter are Aldo Leopold and Fritz Jahr. Fritz Jahr is a theologian, and he's the first one to have actually coined the word bioethics. He's, bioethic in German, bioethics in English. He's in fact a German theologian, and in 1927 he writes this book, which is called Bioethik, eine Umschau über die ethische Beziehung der Menschen zu Tier und Pflanze. So he coins the word bioethics in this book that is dedicated to the observation of the relationship between human being and animals and plants. So we see here how for Fritz Jahr bioethics starts as a discipline whose job, whose task is to take into consideration the relationship with the environment. So bioethics is not born as medical ethics, which seems to be a trend that is being taken in these last decades. Bioethics is a word coined to create a space to reflect on ethical principles that should regulate the relationship between human beings and its own environment. And in this case, Fritz Jahr is strongly influenced by the categorical imperative of Kant. Being able to treat others not as a means to something, but as an end in itself, is one of the main motivations, the main theme that inspires Fritz Jahr works. We don't want to have an utilitaristic society in which everything is a resource exploitable for something else. We don't want that because otherwise everyone would be disposable, would be a disposable goods, and we will use it as far as it's good for us, and after that we can throw it away. This kind of behavior already in 1927 Fritz Jahr understood would have been detrimental to our well-being. And together with Fritz Jahr, I would say Aldo Leopold is openly cited by Potter, thing that we cannot see openly for Fritz Jahr. Because Aldo Leopold wrote this book, which was revolutionary at the time in 1948, Land Ethic, where he reports of being inspired while he was hunting about the relationality that connects himself to the other animals. So, as we can see here from this very basic picture, we have a land, we have an environment, but there's not yet an ethics, at least we're talking about 1948 at the time, that regulates, here I prefer the gender neutral pronoun, the human being's relation to land and to the animals and to the plants which grow upon it. So this circle, this space, it's already the society. We are this. We are not anything above this, as a certain philosophy might have induced us to think. This is already me and you. This is already a connection, an interconnection of beings, and we need to be respectful of these beings because these beings is us. As Attenborough, there's this interesting documentary of his that has been recently published on Netflix, shows Chernobyl is flourishing. I mean, if you take a shot on Chernobyl today, you would see the buildings invaded by plants, animals coming back, something that we experienced also during this pandemic. I mean, okay, animals are finally freer to move in the society. It's against us. It's against our chance to survive, to be dismissive toward what we are. If we think we are above animals, well, we would be disappointed. Human beings are not living in Chernobyl anymore. Animals, plants are even better than we do. So in 1948, but even before in 1927, we start developing a certain reasoning about how can we provide a basic setting of values and ethical principles that would allow us to produce a sustainable well-being. So here in 1970 and in 1975, Potter writes about bioethics first openly. Let's remember, Potter is not a philosopher, he's a doctor, he's an oncologist. Nevertheless, he wants to write a book on a discipline that would bring together science and philosophy. Today, there are scholars who are thinking of leaving out philosophy from the bioethical discourse because it would be too abstract. Bioethics, according to Potter, needs philosophy because it needs a reflective wisdom on certain problems that are always new, because always new are the situations in which human beings and their systems tend to find themselves. So here, Potter writes, I chose bio, here we are reflecting on the etymology, it chose bio to represent a biological knowledge, the science of living systems. And I chose ethics to represent a knowledge of a human value system. On the one hand, we are concerned with biological evolution. On the other, we are concerned with the cultural evolution. So here, bioethics is about the sustainability of the bios and the cultural evolution that would help us to keep the sustainability going. If we feed on a culture that is continuously dismissive of environmental well-being, of medical well-being, and in denial of the threats we're going to face, certainly we are not acting in our advantage, in our in accordance with our goal, with our survival. So here, I think it's important to reflect on the words that have been chosen by Fritz Jahr at the beginning and then Potter. We are choosing bios and not zoe. I mean, bios indicates this reflective quality of human life. Bios means life in its reflection of what life is, and it's very distinct from zoe. Zone is the animal itself. So Zao indicates life as it is in its intuitive, spontaneous way. Bios indicates this ability to reflect on it. And ethos, differently from the Latin variation mos, indicates the accustomed place, Herodotus would say, Plato in the Laws, or Aristotle in Eudemian, Nicomachean Ethics would indicate ethics as the set of habits. In ancient philosophy, we see how ethics indicates this place where we find a set of habits, of rules, of customs that allows us to feel safe. So bioethics is this set of safety guidelines that help us to live a good life, to live a good sustainable life, but not the life as it is, the spontaneous life, but the life, according to Phronesis, a life in which we reflect on what is the wisest thing to do when we act upon something. So I found very inspiring to see the structure of bioethics that Potter had in mind when he wrote his Global Bioethics in the 70s. As you can see here, the foundation of bioethics is not only based on medical bioethics, as as it seems to be recently. So bioethics needs to be based on a certain concern for individual problems. So psychology, psychiatry, psychotherapy, social working, counseling are all disciplines that need to collaborate with bioethics, because if the individual is not healthy, if the population cannot thrive on serenity, on a stable social compound, we cannot have a healthy environment. We cannot have a healthy society. If we are getting sicker and sicker, if we are getting more and more depressed, we cannot make choices that are beneficial for the whole society. So if bioethics is this set of rules that we give ourselves for a sustainable well-being for ourselves and the environment, then we cannot separate bioethics from psychological concerns, from healthy way of doing counseling, psychiatry, of from a certain consideration of the mental well-being. And yet, it seems that today bioethics stands as a sort of guidelines for policies to be applied mostly in a medical environment. So, Potter wanted to bring with bioethics together philosophy and science. And this science, as you can see here, belongs to different disciplines. On the one hand, we have medical bioethics, which considers human capabilities and fragilities. He was an oncologist, and he realized at some point that his job would have felt crushing and meaningless without the ability of sharing a higher knowledge with the individuals he was taking care of. So, medical bioethics should be able to address the human capabilities, the resources, but also the fragilities that are proper to every human beings. In that sense, medical bioethics needs to tap on our ability to handle individual problems, both as a society and as individuals. So it has to collaborate collaborate with disciplines like psychology, social studies, anthropology, and so on. On the other hand, bioethics need to take care of environmental bioethics. As we can see here, we are always individual and population, we are society and the environment. So we cannot have a healthy life if we don't live in a healthy environment. Now I teach at Cal State University's Bay, so I'm based in California, Hayward. And it's visible how the quality of the supermarket, of grocery stores, is different whether you live in Berkeley or in Hayward. This is a very straightforward example. The environment that you find in Berkeley is certainly more refined and attentive to the wellness of a body. Supermarkets around Hayward tend to have less quality food, and so people living there would be more at risk for obesity or diseases connected to their body. They wouldn't even have maybe often the choice of whether to have a plant-based diet, and so on. And this is about artificial environment. I wouldn't even start mentioning natural environment. Clearly in poorer neighborhoods, we have less chances to connect with the environment, to stay outside in the environment. So Oakland and Berkeley, again, way less spaces to stay outside, for children to play outside in the green in Oakland rather than in Berkeley. So it's important to consider bioethics, not in a void again. Medical bioethics is strictly connected to environmental bioethics, to the ability to consider the environmental capabilities, potentialities of a place and its fragilities, and actively do something to produce knowledge of human value system, being able to reflect on what are our values, how do we bring a system around these values, and how can we educate ourselves and the society on these values. So while the biological knowledge is absolutely essential to understand how we function and how we can thrive, this biological knowledge does not stop to a mechanistic view of the human being. The human being is something complex, whose capabilities and fragilities need to be known fully. So in my work, in my book, I tried to follow strictly Potter structure of work to propose a bioethics that to propose and to develop a bioethics that is considering of these problems. So I noticed from a philosophical perspective, the main threats that we have to develop a bioethics in this direction are represented by reductionism, scientism, dualism. These are all terms I'm going to discuss in the next chapter. But just to give you a general sense, thinking that science is the only answer and is the final answer to everything would lead us to consider emotional problems as very little problem that shouldn't bother our rationalistic way of explaining things. So if somebody is in a low mood or is depressed, it's much easier to take a pill, especially designed by this pharma industry, so that this person can come back to work and can come back to produce. So scientism might encourage a worldview for which the answer is just in the science. All the mystery of a human being is explicable through numbers, and what doesn't fall into that is of minor concern for us. So individual problems that are on the rise in this society, such as anxiety, restlessness, emotional numbness, narcissism, I'm talking here not about big important psychopathologies that I don't even touch. I'm talking about the day-to-day cases I tend to cope with in my philosophical practice, and I'm sure in the practice of plenty of colleagues of mine, are somewhat left behind because they are not so important. Another risk is reductionism. So if we reduce the human being to which is strictly connected to scientism. If we reduce the human being to a machine that has to work in a certain way in order to function, then once something is broken, we just replace the piece and we expect this machine to keep going. So again, the same example, if you're depressed, you take this pill, you should be going. This mindset is possible because after Descartes, we developed a dualistic way of seeing the human being, res cogitans, res extensa, the thinking substance, the bodily substance. So we are our thoughts, we are our body. Bioethics should take care of our bodies. Medicine should take care of our bodies. Environmental bioethics or environmental ethics should take care of the bodies. Personally, I don't think this would work. And I don't think Potter, the founder of bioethics, or Fritz Jahr, the founder, the original founder of bioethics, would agree with a dualistic worldview. Because if we have a narcissistic society, our environment would not benefit from it. We saw that in recent events taking place in Brazil with the fires in Amazonia. If we have narcissistic people making important decisions, it would be quite easy to reinforce a certain detached behavior toward the environment. Same thing if we have depressed doctors. They would not be able to see us as a full human being and to have the full picture of our disease. So if we really want to develop a knowledge, in a way knowledge of our value system, is important to see us not in isolation, but as a whole. So not as separated individuals, but as a full machine that can work because I can work because you can work. I am not a lonely island. My being is strictly connected to the being of another person. I am the leg, the other person is another leg, another person is the trunk, and so on and so on. We can see, I don't know, a tree as the full tree who is separated from other trees and so on, or we can say this, we can see this tree as the trunk, as the roots, as the leaves and so on. Every one of us is a non-independent, sorry, every one of us is an independent being. He's something that makes sense in itself, but at the same time is interconnected with other beings in order to make a larger picture. I could just be the trunk, But certainly, I could be a beautiful tree if I feel connected to the roots, to the branches, to the leaves, and so on. So, thinking of ourselves as a whole and not as an isolated unit can certainly help, not just in medical bioethics, but in environmental bioethics, in architecture, in social work. I mean, in any discipline in which we apply this idea. Same thing for environmental bioethics. The individualistic perspective with which we started taking responsibility for our actions. So I am these thoughts, res cogitans. These thoughts make decisions about this body, res extensa, is certainly beneficial for a certain degree of awareness toward our action. But this created an assumption, again, that is detrimental to our well-being. So there's an outside and inside. Inside I have my spirit, outside there's everything else. Inside there's my psyche, outside there's nature. This strict distinction between inside and outside has created a dualistic view of who we are and who we are not, which again is very damaging because on the one hand we have nature, on the other hand it's me. And it doesn't work in that way because I'm nature as well. I have a body, and this body needs food, needs walks, needs to breathe good oxygen. It's all these does not belong to the outside. This is absolutely essential for me to survive. Sustaining a dualistic view to look at life creates halves human beings and not whole human beings. It creates a fictitious separations of what should be outside and what should be inside. And all that is outside is not worthy of care because it does not affect me immediately. I should take care of what is here. What is outside is a kind of a machine. I can fix it whenever I want. This is how we arrive to the ecological crisis in which we are today, and also to a certain way of doing medicine, ecology, psychology that do not consider the human being and its environment as a whole. So, my way of considering bioethics comes directly from the founders, I think, Fritz Jahr and Potter, and tries to fight against these risks of reductionism, scientism, dualism, and to consider these disciplines as interconnected with each other. I don't think we can produce a wise bioethics if we separate it from philosophy, or if we separate it from science, or from psychology, and so on and so on. So this is all for now for this chapter. In the next chapter, I will discuss more what I mean by the risks for a healthy bioethics. Thank you for listening so far.